There's pressure on the British government to come up with concrete plans to help people with cost of living pressures. Sky News reporter Ali Fortescue has the latest from London.
The pressure is definitely on. Nadeem Zahawi obviously is in a pretty unusual position because ordinarily he'd be the person being held to account over what the government is going to do on rising energy bills, but he knows that he can't go ahead with any serious fiscal intervention. He knows that he is sitting in while we wait to find out who the next Prime Minister will be and who their next Chancellor will be. But we have seen him twice in the last 24 hours make some quite interesting comments, to say the least. Today, as you say, this warning that it isn't just going to be low-income households that are going to be impacted by rising energy bills. As you said, he's talking about households people on around £45,000 a year, senior nurses, senior teachers, that he says are going to be facing unimaginable hardship because of rising bills. And of course, the context to this is the Ofgem price cap that we know rose yesterday, meaning that in October people are going to be facing on average £2,000 higher energy bills. So it is obviously going to be incredibly difficult for so many households. Warnings too from some experts that we could see energy bills rising to £7,000 on average in the spring. So obviously the pressure is on for whoever will be the next Prime Minister, not just from the current Chancellor, but from other Tories too. Have a listen to Robert Halfon.
There will have to be an intervention in terms of our public services, schools, the NHS, policing, essential public services, because all it means is that these essential public services will be spending money on their energy bills rather than spending money on frontline services. So this is why it is going to be a huge, large-scale intervention that is needed, but it's got to be sustainable and it's got to be properly costed as well, so it doesn't increase our national debt by too much, because otherwise that will cause other problems down the road.
So Robert Halfon there warning that rising bills are not just going to have an impact on households, but on businesses, on frontline services. And that is, of course, something that the government will be thinking about as well. Worth saying, too, that Nadeem Zahawi, the Chancellor, yesterday became the most senior minister to talk about the fact that people need to think about potentially cutting energy consumption. So he has, in the last 24 hours, intervened or spoken twice about this. But what does whoever's going to be the next Prime Minister think? Well, both Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss say they want to help people with the cost of living crisis. We know that Liz Truss has talked about reversing the national insurance hike, but in reality, that won't really help people on the lowest incomes. It will probably put about £50 or so in their pocket a year, which obviously isn't going to be enough to help with massive rising bills. She's also talked about scrapping the Green Levy. That's about £160 on average a year. So again, not enough, many people are saying. Rishi Sunak is criticising Liz Truss, saying you can't promise tax cuts and direct cost of living support. But he also hasn't really given any specific details on the direct help that he would be offering if he becomes Prime Minister. So there is pressure on direct intervention, of course, alongside this, a row to the public sector pay, warnings about strikes. We have talked about the cost of living crisis a lot, but it does really feel like we are on the cusp of people really facing hardship with their bills, many people in unmanageable situations, and that obviously is going to be the big problem that will dominate the next few years for whoever becomes the next Prime Minister.